This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. The NBA continuing to roll on. Well, actually, the Golden State Warriors continue to roll on. Even as we do this podcast, no one has been able to knock off the champs, but we don't know. All I know is that my conspiracy theory can still stand. But for the rest of everything else happening in the NBA, we got to make sure that we have the right frame of people, the right frame of minds to help break all that stuff down. And you know I got to do that with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mack, contributor, writer of one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, the Big Kahuna, and my PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. You got any conspiracy theories to throw at me this week, too?
Well, no, I mean, I'm going to let you go ahead and ride out with that. But definitely, salute to all the fans and listeners of The Baseline. We have a great show on tap, man. It's just an amazing time to be covering the game. So much going on, so much happening. As you mentioned, Golden State, San Antonio Spurs. And like I said, we even talked about the last show, just kind of the parity that's going on in the NBA, especially in the Eastern Conference. It's just great basketball being played kind of throughout. And yeah, you have some of those downtrodden teams, if you will. But overall, I really love what the product has been showing on the floor for the NBA this season.
Oh, no, man, don't question. And we have a really great show rolled up for you this week. We got our man, Jake Pavorsky. He's editor for Liberty Ballers. I'm sure everybody has been well aware of the stuff that's been happening out in Philadelphia. Well, our man is going to come on and help us break a lot of that stuff down. Some recent reports have filed in, and it just seems like the drama continues. So we'll try to sort all of that stuff out in a few moments. Also, in our segment of The Drop, we have a certain specific player who has finally released his feelings and his emotions about his tenure playing with his former team. We'll talk about whether or not that was a good or bad idea. And then also, we got our man Warren Shaw helping give us a little more insight on some quality fantasy players to be looking at as we continue to roll out and discuss the fantasy side of the NBA. So can't wait to get into that stuff, man. A lot of good stuff, and we appreciate everyone continually showing their love and support for The Baseline. You know how to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA_The Baseline. Hashtag up The Baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. Available on all the major platforms. Available on Stitcher, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, and iTunes. So be sure to download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
I
down.
break you down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week with us, we've got a really great guest who's going to help us dissect and really get in to what's happening with the Philadelphia 76ers, the organization, with the team. We got our man, Jake Pavorsky. He is one of the premier editors for Liberty Ballers, part of SB Nation's premier blog sites that covers the Philadelphia 76ers. Jake, thanks for joining us this week here on The Baseline. Jake, I had an opportunity to take a look at a few of the stories that you've been following up on with regards to Jerry CoAngelo now coming on board. And myself and Shaw, listen, the resume that Jerry CoAngelo brings, undoubtedly he's there, obviously, to help change the culture. But it's just kind of interesting to me because we really thought that with the ownership and the move to get Sam Hinkie, that it just seemed like the Sixers had already had their minds made up that they were going to go in a different direction, a direction that's metrically involved, looking at the analytics, looking at the numbers. And then to have I want to say an old school kind of guy like Jerry CoAngelo now to come on board. I mean, when you first saw this happen and when you wrote this story, what was the first thing that was going through your mind knowing that CoAngelo now is on board to help the 76ers ownership, this group, and this team turn everything around?
Well, my first thought was that I liked it. I thought whenever you can bring in a smart basketball mind like Jerry CoAngelo, you have to do it. And you look at his ties to Team USA basketball, that could be helpful down the line. And he's got a great rapport with players. Clearly, he's got a good rapport with agents. And, Sam Hinkie has not always been the best when it comes to player relations and agent relations. So bringing in CoAngelo kind of undoes some of the PR damage that Hinkie has done. But the more I heard about Colangelo's role with the team and Hinkie's sort of what's the word I want to use? Demoted role, I guess I should say. That's when I started liking it less, because I think what this became was over a 2-week period with the Okafor incident. That was when I guess popular opinion and ownership really changed, and they became really concerned about the direction the team was heading in, and made what I think was sort of a brash decision to bring in CoAngelo and really change the face of this team. Because if you look at it now, it's very clearly CoAngelo's team. Like, it's his call. He'll do what he wants. He'll bring in the guys he wants. And it may be a collaborative effort on some sort of levels between CoAngelo and Hinkie, but at the end of the day, it's CoAngelo's call. And I think that's very clear to see. And that's kind of concerning too, because I don't want them alienating Sam Hinkie, who's proven himself to be a smart basketball mind. Yes, he has his flaws, but I think to take the team away from him essentially after 2.5 years of this process, it could be very detrimental in the end. And, the rebuild may not look the same as we thought it would. And I hope they don't speed it up too quickly to the point that, they end up being mediocre again. Because my example is always the Pelicans. If you look at what the Pelicans did, they traded for Drew Holiday. They signed Ryan Anderson. They signed Tyreek Evans. They spent Eric Gordon, spent all this money in one offseason. And look where they are right now. They're a bottom 5 team in the league. And I just don't want the Sixers to be back, it being a mediocre level, because this is something we've been trying to avoid for so long.
So one of the things, you touched on is the Okafor incident. That's something we want to get back to, but, kind of staying in the same mantra in which we're discussing right now. With the CoAngelo signing, there was a lot of talk for over the last 2 years, if you will, I don't want to use this term, inappropriately, but maybe misinformed or uneducated fans saying, well, the league needs to do something. But now there's, rumors out there that the league did do something. What is your feeling on that specifically, where Adam Silver maybe reached out to CoAngelo and to Harris and try to make this marriage happen? Do you think the league overstepped its bounds a little bit?
So I'm still trying to get a feel for what the relationship was there between the league and the Sixers and CoAngelo. And at first it sounded like the league sort of forced this on the Sixers. And then as Ken Berger put out a report today for CBS saying that sort of Harris approached the league and said, hey, we need some help. Can you help me out here? Bring in some guys, give me a list of names or whatever. And I think it's somewhere in the middle there. I think it's probably the owners have been complaining about the way the Sixers have been doing things. I think it's clear that they're not happy with how they've been operating. And Silver sort of came to Harris. This is just my opinion. Silver came to Harris and said, listen, you guys need to make some change. I'm not going to force this upon you, but here's some guys. Talk to them. Let me know what you think. And, Harris agreed and picked on CoAngelo. And that was sort of that. So I do, if that is to be the case, I think that the league sort of did overstep their boundaries here, because you look at Adam Silver, who is sort of stayed aside from what the Sixers have been doing for the past couple of years and sort of let them operate freely. And all of a sudden now you get the owners involved and they're not happy. And now the league is sort of putting pressure on the Sixers to make moves. And again, that's something else that could be detrimental to the process, because now you're sort of forcing them to speed things up a little bit and say, listen, like, this is no longer acceptable. Like, you guys need to start putting together a better product. And if you do that too quickly, that's when things start to unravel. And if that means start trading some assets or signing some guys to bigger contracts that you wouldn't have done previously, it's not a good look. And I don't like the league's involvement in all this. And hopefully it was just, Harris coming to Silver, but we'll never know that. And you see conflicting reports, and you have to think it's somewhere in the middle there.
Jake Pavorsky joining us here, editor for Liberty Ballers. Be sure to check out the website, www.libertyballers.com, part of SB Nation, also available on Twitter at Liberty_Ballers. Jake, and it's interesting because this kind of ties into the recent report that you released on the website with regards to the Harris Group now, possibly looking at the idea of selling the 76ers. And, when you see now how this is starting to kind of come to fruition, it almost kind of gives the idea that, there's almost like I hate, because everyone's using the word tanking around the 76ers team, the organization, and everything that's going on. So it almost seems like, once they come off of this was all in place for someone like a Jerry CoAngelo to come in and possibly, replenish, revitalize, however you want to call it, come in and save this team. Do you get the sense that that's exactly what's supposed to be happening if indeed the Harris Group does decide to sell this team? And is CoAngelo the right person for the task at hand? Because clearly it's more than just about selling the team. It's also selling to the fans again, given what's happened over the last 3 years.
Yeah. I hope that the Harris group doesn't move on. I think that Forbes report may have been leading a little too far into the future. Maybe a lot of speculation there, but anytime a reliable outlet like Forbes comes out with a story like that, you have to give some sort of stock to it. And there are parts of it that I think I could see, Harris leaving again. This is what he does. He buys things, he raises the value, and then he leaves them and moves on to a different project. That's sort of his MO business wise. But he's invested a lot of money in a practice facility, and the league's gonna have a big money TV contract over the next year. And for him to sort of get out before that, I think would be unwise. But it does sort of make sense that you look at CoAngelo's involvement in the team now, and it's likely that he'll have some sort of ownership stake in the team. It's not too far-fetched to think that somewhere down the line, Harris could decide to say, listen, like we've maxed out our value here. Like we've done what we can. Like it's time for us to go, and sort of hand it off to CoAngelo and whoever else he brings in. And that could be okay if it's just CoAngelo, like Jerry himself. Because if you bring in his son, Brian CoAngelo, that's what scares me. And you see wherever Jerry goes, Brian sort of followed him, and he kind of handed off the reins to him. His son, when he owned the Phoenix Suns, Brian was the GM in Phoenix there, and he's not a great GM, and I would not be happy with him here. If you look at what he did in Toronto, he made some absolutely terrible moves. He gave Jason Capono the full mid-level exception. He gave Landry Fields a large contract. He got absolutely nothing in a sign and trade for Chris Bosh. He set back Toronto by several years. And if Jerry's going to come in and all of a sudden, if Harris moves on with the ownership group and CoAngelo now has a large stake in the team, I think it's very good chance that he brings in his son, and I think that could be a possible downfall of it. I mean, the team is bad enough as it is, but if you bring in Brian CoAngelo, I don't think this team gets to where they want to go. And you're alienating a smart basketball mind in Sam Hinkie, so that would be my problem. But I also think we're starting to get a bit too far ahead of ourselves and the thought of Harris leaving this team, because he's repeatedly denied that they're trying to sell the team, and he's starting to put a lot of money into the team, and he seems invested in their long-term future and their success. So I hope it stays that way.
So when you talk about a guy leaving, I mean, like I said, maybe we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. So, let's bring it back into the guy who just came, and so who's not going anywhere for a while, and that is CoAngelo. Put on your hat here if you're Jerry CoAngelo. What's the first move? What's the first order of business? Obviously assessing the roster, but really after that, what's the first order of business if you're Jerry CoAngelo?
I guess it has to do with something with free agency. One of CoAngelo's first comments was he clearly sees a void in veteran leadership, and he thinks that the team is too young and, sort of have lost their way a little bit. And if you bring in some older guys with some more experience, yada, 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 the team will get better, whatever. So I guess that sort of means spending a little bit in free agency, which is something they haven't done at all. And they've got the money to do it. So I imagine they'll become players in the free agency market in some respect. And maybe that also means to bring in some veterans, that means parting with future assets. If the right trade comes along at the deadline, maybe they move a first-round pick or two. But I've always been under the impression that you should get your young guys as many minutes as possible. And if you want to fill the end of your bench with some older guys who can sort of contribute here and there, that's fine. I just don't want them going out and spending big money on a Rudy Gay or just some mid-level player who doesn't really put you over the top. Because what this team has done is try to do is set themselves up to get superstars, either through the draft or have enough money to do it through free agency to, put themselves in the best position to get the best players possible. And I think if you just start, finding mid-level players to just sort of fill a role, and because they're veterans or whatever, or you like them, I think that's what hurts the team. So I hope they're fiscally responsible this offseason and try not to go too crazy with speeding up the process and bringing in some older guys. But that's something that it seems like CoAngelo could do, and I don't know. I hope he's a little smarter than that.
Jake Pavorsky joining us here. The Baseline NBA podcast, our segment of the breakdown, as we're discussing the state of affairs for the Philadelphia 76ers. Major moves in management, upper management have been made, and how this will trickle down and affect the team moving forward. Okay, so let's talk present time, and CoAngelo's presence should mean what, Jake, when you're looking at this team as it is now? They spent the last 3 years vested in big men, but clearly the problem is they don't have anyone, or Coach Brown doesn't have anyone he feels with confidence to be able to handle the rock and distribute the basketball to his playmakers. And, ultimately something is probably going to have to be done, whether it be via way of looking at this from a draft perspective, from a trade perspective, or even from a free agent perspective, just looking at this team and looking at what's the first thing that has to be addressed in order to help Coach Brown get these guys to play better basketball. What do you think needs to happen, and where do you think CoAngelo needs to focus on specifically with the roster at hand?
I think you start with point guard. I think it's very clear that you need someone who can facilitate the offense, get his own shot, and you need someone to run the pick and roll with. And clearly the guys they have there right now, some of them probably aren't part of the future. If you look at someone like TJ McConnell, Isaiah Cannon, I can't imagine those guys playing a ton of minutes a little further down the line. And I think really Kendall Marshall might be the only guy with a future on this team just because he's a decent enough shooter from outside. He can pass the ball. But I think the best place for this team to look, if you were looking for a point guard for the future, is through the draft. Chris Dunn has been highly touted by a lot of people. I'm not that high on him, but I see where people like him. Decent mid-range shooter, can get to the lane at ease, good passer. I'm a Demetrius Jackson fan, a guy who can create his own shot, working on his passing skills, sort of a combo guard. And you look at Jamal Murray, another combo guard, can really get his shot up. Runs the pick and roll okay, decent ball handler, pretty good passer. So those are a handful of guys that I think you can look at the draft and see you can find positions of need there. And you could bring in those guys that can make a difference down the line, as opposed to chasing a free agent and maybe spending big money. So that, I think, that's your first order of business, is get a point guard. And then after that, you have to find, I guess, a swing man who can just do more than just shoot threes. Like, you need to find someone you can feed the ball through, and he can sort of take over the offense. And hopefully they can do that in the draft too. Brandon Ingram is another top guy that if the Sixers can end up getting the Lakers pick, he's someone they target. Really sweet stroke, starting to put it together for Duke. I'm under the impression. I feel that they shouldn't spend that much in free agency until they see what they have with these draft picks. You still got Joel Embiid, who needs to play. You have Dario Saric coming over, and you likely have 3 or 4 first-round picks coming up in this draft. So I say wait till you see what those guys can do, see where they fit, and then address the holes around them if you can find some pieces that you think can be, franchise cornerstones.
So where do you stand on the whole, Okafor and Noel, not being able to play together and that type of thing? And then you just mentioned Saric, who's, I guess, will potentially come over next season. How do you see those guys, and obviously Embiid, how do you see all that fitting together? Do you feel like Philadelphia would eventually have to make a move? I mean, I know you want to evaluate the talent, but would 1 or 2 of those guys potentially have to go?
Yeah, I think it's very inevitable that at least 1 or 2 of them has to go. And you look at just Okafor and Noel specifically. That was the 2 of them having success was pretty expected of Nerlens Noel to acquire a jump shot, basically, and sort of work on that. And he looks terrible. He cannot shoot a mid-range jump shot to save his life. I think he's shooting maybe 15% from like 12 to 15 feet out. So if you can't space the floor with Nerlens Noel, you're clogging the paint. And the one thing that Nerlens was good at last year was when you had him in the low post, he could see the court very well. He was finishing around the rim a little bit better. He was passing to his teammates. And now that you have him at the top of the key, that sort of vision and offensive scoring skill set, you just don't see that anymore whatsoever. And Okafor, too, he can be a bit of a black hole offensively. If you look at what he's done at Duke, you saw a great passing skill set, someone who really, looked to find teammates. And now every time he touches the ball, he's just looking for the basket. He's just trying to find ways to score. And sometimes I think he settles for jump shots too much as opposed to trying to get to the rim. And you look at bringing in a guy like Joel Embiid. I don't know how you even fathom fitting any of those guys together well. Whether it's Joel and Okafor in the front court, or whether it's Joel and Nerlens, there's got to be some moves made. I think Dario would be a better fit with any of those guys just because he can sort of stretch the floor. He's really improved his three-point shooting over the past couple of years, but his defense isn't that great. And I think if you pair him with Okafor specifically, you have an awful defensive front court there that could really get dominated. So I think you try and get through it. You see where you can max out your value, and hopefully maybe one of Okafor or Nerlens can step up over the next 18 months, and you find max value like you did with MCW and move on.
So as you mentioned the Okafor thing, I definitely wanted to get back to that right now. Where do you stand, as a guy who covers this team kind of, incessantly, if you will, about the fights, if you will, that happened in Boston and how Philadelphia handled that situation itself? Do you feel like there should have been swifter or even more severe punishment for Okafor?
I think they didn't react. I think there was a lot of fault on both sides. I think it was the fault of Okafor for having that issue where he's chasing down hecklers because he doesn't like what they said. And I think the way the team treated the situation wasn't that going radio silent is not the correct thing to do in that situation. And then, as more videos emerged, then you finally suspend him. It wasn't a good look for the team. And I think that was also what led Adam Silver to sort of step in and say, listen, you guys need a little bit of help. You clearly can't handle this situation on your own. So it's a black eye for the organization that has enough bad PR as it is. And it makes it easy for people to point and say, look, you guys need veterans. This is clearly what this team is lacking, and that's why you're losing. And I think it's a bit of a tired narrative, but it allows people to continue that because these young guys continue to put themselves in silly situations.
Jake Pavorsky joining us here, part of Liberty Ballers. Be sure to check them out on Twitter at Liberty_Ballers. Jake, actually, to follow up on the point that you just made with regards to the handling of Jahlil Okafor's situation, and to me, I think it also lends to the idea of what the perception. I want to get your feel of what the tone or what the feel is like right now in the Philly area. I mean, the Philly fans, 76ers fans. This is a rich, traditionally, prideful team organization. Years. Classic players. I mean, everything about them is picturesque of what we remember in the coming up, the grind of the ABA and the NBA finally coming together, bringing basketball, the Dr. J. I mean, everything about the 76ers has a richness to it. And then when you see what some of these younger players have done, whether it be on or off the court, is there a level of concern, or is it so much so that they have so much belief in the ownership group figuring out a way to turn this around that they are really trying to exercise the patience? I'm not talking about this from the perspective of the fans coming out to the games. I'm just talking about the tone and the feel of the community and its support for the Philadelphia 76ers.
I think people are depressed now. I mean, when Sam Hinkie took over and when Josh Harris bought the team, you knew that they were going to break this thing down and that it was going to be a slow climb to the top. And for the first 2 years or so, losing games was fine because you knew the objective was to get high draft picks. At this point, you should start seeing some sort of incremental progress that these guys are showing. And you see that in very few areas, but in a lot of other areas, you're seeing regression. I mean, the team's record is worse. You're seeing Nerlens regressing because you have Jahlil next to him. Hollis Thompson's not a good player. You're hoping to see a little bit more out of him. So you have all these guys here, and no one is really getting better. Like, no one's really separating themselves to say, listen, this guy can truly be a cornerstone. Like, you can really build around someone like this. And it hurts. This has been a very painful 3 years for most fans, I think. And the Embiid situation has complicated things. It's just been a lot of bad PR, and it makes it hard for people to support this team, despite the fact that they've been so patient in allowing them to operate the way they have. And now you look at bringing in CoAngelo, which probably signals a change from what they've done and the patience, but it might be too much. I think that having CoAngelo on the team might be their way of just trying to get things going way too quickly. And I think people are concerned right now. It's really not a good time to be a Sixers fan. And there's a mix of both disappointment and how bad this team is looking and how none of their top picks have sort of separated themselves. And it's concerning that the guys that they have there right now in the front office may not be able to get the job done. And then you hear reports about the owner possibly trying to leave and move on and find a different sports venture. It's tiresome. And I hope that we can get to the point 2 years down the line where we see success and, you find guys to build around in the draft. But right now it's sort of hard to envision that right now. And I think that's what hurts people the most.
So one thing, we didn't touch on, and, kind of get a final thought here, if we will. Talked about the management, we talked about some of the players, but where do you stand with Brett Brown as a coach? And more or less, point blank, do you think he's safe going into the future for the Philadelphia 76ers?
He's definitely safe. I don't see a reason for him not to be just yet. For him to be able to put up with this as long as he has is a testament to his character and the kind of coach he is. And I think the organization loves the amount of work he's put in. You can clearly see that he cares about trying to get this team to where they need to be. But I have some smaller concerns right now just from the way he runs his lineup, some of the guys he chooses to put in late in games. Like, for example, even tonight against Brooklyn, recording this on Thursday, they just finished an awful game against Brooklyn. And he's letting Isaiah Cannon run the point in the last couple of minutes when TJ McConnell had an excellent evening, had a career high in points, and he facilitates the ball much better. And neither option is great right now. It's kind of a lose-lose situation, but you see options that are possibly better, and he's just sort of choosing guys that I don't think fit in situations where you need the best players on the floor. So as you look towards the future and when they start bringing in other guys that, you hope are better, if these issues keep continuing where he can't find lineups to put together and late in games, they're losing games in the manner that they continue to, I think that becomes an issue where you look to maybe find a new coach. But he's going to be here through at least the end of this contract, and they're sign him to an extension and go from there. I hope it works out with him, but I'm starting to become a little bit concerned about some of his coaching styles. But again, it's early, and I hope that when they bring in more talent, he can sort of put things together and there can be a good marriage there.
He is the man, and he is definitely riding the roller coaster ride that is the Philadelphia 76ers. Editor and really a great writer, and puts together great articles for Liberty Ballers, SB Nation. It's our boy Jake Pavorsky. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at Jake Pavorsky, and remember to go to the site libertyballers.com and catch him on Twitter at Liberty_Ballers. Jake, man, we really appreciate you taking some time out to really give us a full, in-depth scope on the state of affairs happening with the Philadelphia 76ers, man.
My pleasure, guys. Trust the process.
Thanks, Jake.
Great stuff from our man, Jake Pavorsky, editor for Liberty Ballers, Shaw. And, we've seen this before, okay? Let's not act like we have not seen, quote unquote, a state of emergency, and that's what the perception is. We've seen this with the Los Angeles Clippers. We've seen this with the New Orleans Pelicans. We've seen this even with the Seattle Supersonics. And it's not just about the fact that it's about an owner disheartened or disenfranchised and wants to just get rid of the team. I think it's him realizing that, he may be in over his head and he may not really be, patient enough or, be well vested enough to want to focus and really fix what seems to be more than just a problem that you're throwing money at. And it's kind of an unfortunate situation because franchises like the Philadelphia 76ers are just hard to sell on the idea that we just got to scrap everything and start all over. Just way too much history about what this organization and this team and the team has done for the NBA for so many years.
Well, first of all, shout out to Jake. What an insightful dude, and he brought some real depth to the Philadelphia 76ers situation, I think, here for us. And yeah, to your point, they really haven't spent that much money. They had to get above the salary floor, if you will, last season, at the trade deadline, so that they wouldn't have to, have some of the penalties and fees that go associated for not meeting the minimum salary cap. So they've done a decent job in terms of managing the cap because they have a lot of players that make bare minimum, if you will, 500,000, $1 million here, 800,000 there. So they've done a good job when it comes to that. But you're gonna see with a situation like bringing in CoAngelo, as Jake alluded to, there's a good chance, a possibility that this summer, if not even sooner, that they'll be buyers, and we'll see how that works out for them because you don't want to be in the middle of the road, as he said. And which is kind of where they were a couple of years ago when they still had Iguodala and Drew Holiday and things like that. They seem to be on an upward swing a little bit with Doug Collins, and they kind of hit a wall and were never able to get past that. But this talent just has to pan out. You have to figure out what you have in Okafor, see if Embiid can even get on the floor, see if Nerlens Noel is going to actually develop more than he has in his 2 years in the NBA currently, and then kind of take it from there. Bring Sarek over as well. A lot's going on in this Philadelphia 76er team right now, and again, it's just interesting to see that the rumors or the potential that the league got involved in it. That's something to me that as Jake said, it could be problematic, but I think in the short term, I think it's going to help the product on the floor for the NBA and maybe even the fan base itself.
I'm just really curious, Shaw, about when the NBA presented, this idea, or this vision, so to speak, of how Jerry CoAngelo is going to come in. And I don't want to say, I don't want to use the phrase fix everything, because this is really not what it's about. But I think even Jake himself, was trying to maybe pinpoint more so where CoAngelo's advice, expertise, and what his what he can do to help improve the situation that's going on in Philadelphia. I think even he is as we're, as he's writing the stories and everything, is trying to figure that out as well too. I really am curious about where CoAngelo's influence is going to have an instant impact for the Sixers organization, because usually when somebody gets brought in a situation like what the Sixers are in, it's usually for one thing. Obviously, something's not getting right and somebody's got to go. And the first thought process you're probably thinking is, well, Sam Hinkie's got to go. Now, CoAngelo has, given the quote unquote vote of confidence that he is there to help Hinkie and not really assess Hinkie. But I got to tell you, man, you look at this situation, you just mentioned it before, how the Sixers had to come up above the cap and everything like that. You look at the talent that's out there. Everyone is saying, oh, they're just throwing a D-League team out there. Well, where do you think you're going to get any of these NBA players from? If they're not playing in the league, if they're not playing overseas, where do you think they're going to get them from? At some point, these D-League players are going to have to pan out. These undrafted players are going to have to pan out. At some point, some of these players are just going to have to pan out. So it makes me wonder, is Hinkie really a great talent evaluator as much as he is a great numbers cruncher? We've seen it time and time again where certain people get brought into a certain role and don't really have the know-how to execute other duties that are important to that role, rather than it just being what they were brought in for, which is to help assess from a numerical perspective what the Sixers can do to be a better basketball team.
Oh, then there you have it, because then that's why you figure CoAngelo's been brought in now to make it a more of a happy marriage, if you will, and a happy medium between, the analytical side and the sheer talent evaluation side, if you will, and figure out how this team can best move forward. Again, it's tough to watch them at times without doubt. And yeah, they have D-League type level players on their roster. And that's not something that you want to see every day in the NBA when you lose by whatever it was, 40, 50 points to the San Antonio Spurs, and consistently lose games in the fourth quarter because you just don't have the right mindset or the veteran presence out there. And I think Jake had an excellent point too with Brett Brown, because sometimes he does seem like he's just, hey, whatever, on the fly, coaching on the fly. All right, you go in here now, especially at that point guard situation, which is very unstable for them. They don't have somebody who knows how to get people the ball in the right situations and even control the basketball when they need to and not turn it over. A lot going on here, but like I said, we'll stay tuned as the Philadelphia 76ers try to get things right.
I got one last question to ask you with regards to this, Shaw, before we kind of wrap this thing up in a nice little bow. And clearly we don't want to put this under the Christmas tree for anybody, but here's my question for you. Because of what we're seeing right now, how much of that relationship between Brett Brown and Sam Hinkie is tied into the talent that we're seeing? It really starts making me wonder how much of an influence Brett Brown truly has, how much input Brett Brown truly has on the talent that's being put out on that basketball court. Because I got to believe, and Brett Brown has been under the Greg Popovich coaching tree, I have to believe that Brett Brown is a good assessor of talent. And clearly, if he struggles, even from a rotation perspective of working with the talent that's around him, it's just telling me that he doesn't have nearly as much the input as we think he should have, given the fact that if Sam Hinkie has really not gotten it right from a drafting perspective, and even from bringing players in from wherever he's bringing them in from, at some point, you got to lean on somebody. You're not going to lean on your owners. You got to lean on the coaches. So I can't understand how the talent that's on that basketball court can't translate to play the kind of basketball Brett Brown is asking of them. If they can't make shots, they just can't make shots. I get that. But when you watch them on the court, they look like they don't have a clue on how to play within a system, which again, at some point, if you're the coach, you get rid of these guys. Like they're of no use to you. You can't play these guys. So clearly there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, well, and it stems from the point guard situation, which, even Jake alluded to, something that we even talked about even in our fantasy shows, who's going to be the point guard. And now at the time of recording this show, they're trying to work Tony Roten back into the rotation. Kendall Marshall is due back, I think over the weekend and things like that too. So between he, McConnell, and even Isaiah Cannon, who we know is more shoot force than point guard related, That's the situation. That's where you want your general out there to kind of stabilize your, especially things from an offensive standpoint, and even maybe be the captain of your defense, kind of pointing some things out as well. That situation has been a disaster for them for the entire season. And now again, trying to work back two injured point guards who are now the premier point guards, if you will, on your team, on this roster. That's going to make that situation even a little bit more fluid and maybe even a little bit more detrimental as Philadelphia struggles for the rest of the season.
CoAngelo on board. Harris Group might look to jump ship. Brett Brown pulling out what's left of his hair. And Jahlil Okafor, really just the bad boy of the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, it's just all good right now in the city of brotherly love. And we just hope that at some point things really just begin to turn around and we can actually see the plan, the process, the trust of the process finally coming to fruition. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. And this week in The Drop, came across a very interesting article that was written through ESPN. And it seems that, every now and again, when a player leaves a situation in which, let's just say, they didn't leave too many happy faces with the fans, maybe with the ownership, maybe with the general manager, maybe with the head coaches. And they go on, they move on from, that tarnished relationship. They go to play for another team. It's always great because if you're someone in the media, you want to push your microphone up to that dude and ask them how they really feel about their prior relationship, the prior team that they played for. And it's kind of interesting, Shaw, because Deron Williams was asked, what his feelings were like at the time that he played for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, everybody knows that he's right now currently playing for the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks are having a pretty good season. Actually, a surprisingly really, really good season. I think maybe in some ways they're somewhat overachieving. But when asked this question, he basically said to the effect that he just felt like everybody felt like everything that was bad with the Brooklyn Nets was basically on him, that it was basically his fault. And I got to tell you, Sean, when I read this article, as much as I feel like I want to have sympathy for Deron Williams, because yeah, I think some of it was unjustly put on him. However, this is someone who walked away with over $100 million, basically, of the Brooklyn Nets money over the last 4 years and has essentially given them nothing. And they basically rolled out the Brinks truck. They basically auctioned the New Jersey Brooklyn Nets for the sake of Deron Williams being the cornerstone of that franchise. And at the end of the day, when someone asks you, what your final thoughts were about playing for that team and what, where you were with everything, I just feel like, no good is going to come of it now. You finally expressing the fact that you just never felt comfortable. You never felt like you belonged. You never felt like, like everything had to be on you. I just think it's a bad look when a player does that because you know what, man? You take $100 million of a franchise money. It is on you to make that team better. It's on you to help produce championships. And with that, you're going to have to kind of bear the responsibility of wearing that on your sleeve. And if you don't do that, then guess what? That's a part of your resume because I don't see anyone else now walking up to give Deron Williams another $100 million contract. I mean, those days of him being a great basketball player seem to be far long gone. And now he's playing in a city on a team, on an organization where he can kind of fly under the radar. And anything he does right now looks a heck of a lot better than what his 4-year resume was with the Brooklyn Nets.
I mean, that's true. And at the end of the day, you probably want to let sleeping dogs lie, if you will, and let that situation kind of just rest. But he made those comments. And then, we're in an era now where players are a lot more outspoken and they will tell you exactly how they feel about that situation. But it kind of even goes back to something Paul Pierce said where, he didn't feel like Deron Williams was a leader. He came there expecting him to be a different type of player, different type of person. And he got there and was surprised to find that Williams was surprisingly gun shy, if you will, and were reluctant to take the leadership role. And hence why they made that move to get Pierce and Garnett over there, because that team needed some life and some personality on it, and Williams wasn't able to provide it for them. So this is a situation I definitely agree with you in terms of, yeah, it was distasteful for him to say those things for sure. But as I said earlier, we live in an age right now where players they're going to speak their minds even after the fact. And right now, as you just even kind of close that point, he's looking real great because he's playing good basketball on a team where the expectations are not nearly as high as they were when he was in New Jersey / Brooklyn.
Yeah, and I guess my biggest problem with the comments itself is Deron Williams has had ample opportunity to address this situation. He has had ample opportunity while he was wearing a Brooklyn Nets jersey, because let's not get it twisted, okay? It wasn't as if there was any head coach who was so, high profile like that Deron Williams would have been at odds if he had something to say, if there was a problem with the perception of how he was being touted out there. Brooklyn Nets PR not doing a good enough job to supplement and to kind of get that stigma off of his back. That's on Deron Williams. That's on him, the basketball player. And again, I say this, he wanted this. He was out in Utah before he came to Brooklyn. Okay. And while he was there in Utah, he somehow was able to be the target of one of the most legendary coaches to walk away from the basketball game. And at some particular point, I understand he seems to be a non-confrontational type of person, a type of person that likes to keep to himself. But there's nothing that you can keep to yourself when you demand the kind of money that you asked the organization to give you, and the expectations that the organization should have on you. They should be heavy. They should be overwhelming, because that was the whole point. He, at that time frame, wanted to prove that he was one of the top not even top 5, top 3 point guards in the NBA. And in order to separate himself from the rest of those other point guards, it was a matter of him doing what was necessary to take a team or take a franchise to a championship. So he elects to come to the one organization that has not even sniffed a championship in years. And yet, this is all about what he was incapable of doing, more so than what it was about of what he brought to the table. And it's just funny to me, Shaw, because even when someone like a Paul Pierce, who has been there and done that, played on really bad Boston Celtics teams, has played on great Boston Celtics teams, and has been in the middle of establishing great Boston Celtics teams, when he comes out and says something, you know that you don't take it with a grain of salt. It's like the Rock of Gibraltar, because he's been there and done that. So it makes it very hard for me to not buy into the fact that Deron Williams could have easily done the same thing, or if not of something similar. And Paul Pierce is not a loudmouth. He isn't a Kevin Garnett. He's always been that kind of person where he kind of, he gets in where he fits in, but is not afraid to step up and take ownership, take leadership of a team, because that was what his expectations were. That's what the Celtics paid him for. And I think that, to me, was the more disturbing part about why all of a sudden now, as he's playing as a Dallas Maverick, Deron Williams decides to jump out and make these type of comments.
Yeah, I mean, he should have chilled, and again, I said earlier, it's not something that needed to be said. And, there's a lot that even you just said right there that, goes back to the kind of the fundamental way that free agents and players are handled. Guy like Williams, coming off great season in Utah, if you will, quote unquote coach killer. He and Jerry Sloan didn't get along, and he goes over to Brooklyn or New Jersey at the time, and again gets there, plays relatively well that first half season, signs a big deal, and yeah, like you said, he was one of the top 3-point guards in the NBA. But then he gets hurt, and battles injuries, kind of on and off for the next X amount of years, and just never really becomes the same guy. And he just didn't have the mental capacity, in essence, to kind of overcome that and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to prove everybody wrong, or I'm not going to say prove anybody wrong, because people were on his side and wanted to see him do well. But when he started to have some of those down seasons and kept getting injured, he kind of just recluded into himself. And didn't say, okay, well, let me go out there and really play my best basketball, put my best foot forward at all times. And, that's what we saw. And again, hey, it worked out the way it did. Brooklyn took a shot. with all those players, getting D well, obviously acquiring Joe Johnson as well, then bringing KG and Pierce a year later. And for all intents and purposes, that could have worked. I don't think they took a bad shot. Yes, they gave up a lot to do it. They took a shot, given the makeup of their team, and even in putting guys like Garnett and Pierce to kind of give the team that some life, as I said earlier, because Williams wasn't a rah guy. Neither was Joe Johnson. Neither is Brook Lopez. But it didn't work. And Deron Williams, again, he's moved on. So it's best to, as you said, move on from that situation and not worry about the past, as you're in a new situation now in Dallas and playing pretty well.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree with you. And hopefully now he can finally let this lay to rest. I'm sure that the Brooklyn Nets have already tried to lay this thing to rest. Lionel Hollins obviously has a lot of work ahead of him, but I think he definitely has a core group of players that he is willing to work with. And certainly we just hope the best for Deron Williams, and hopefully he won't have to revisit, quote unquote, the nightmare of the life that he lived as the $100 million man out of Brooklyn. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of The Drop. Shaw, one other topic we wanted to drop now in the drop, and obviously, we did this during the course of the offseason or preseason, so to speak, where we kind of start rolling in a little bit discussions and talk about fantasy basketball and, players that we definitely want to keep our eye out for. And now, as we've kind of gotten almost to the quarter-way mark of the NBA season, there's some guys, man, that clearly are playing above their heads. Probably were not on the radar for a lot of people is in their pick'em leagues, whether it be rotisserie, FanDuel, and whatnot. And clearly some who have just completely fallen short of what their fantasy expectations are supposed to be. And I know that there's a few of them, Shaw, that you definitely have been having your eye on. You want to make sure that you give our listeners a little bit of insight of what to be looking forward to as we now start to progress through the season.
Absolutely. As we were talking a little bit off air, this is a situation or a segment that we're going to handle from kind of a standard standpoint here, not necessarily worrying about the specifics of your leagues and this guy gives me threes and this guy's giving me steals and high percentages. Just kind of who's playing real well and maybe a little bit over the head, and some guys who you may want to target in general. So I'm going to start with kind of an obvious one in Kevin Love. He's played really well to begin the season, but Kyrie coming. And if you believe LeBron saying, okay, well, Kevin Love is going to be the focus of the offense, that lasted all of the maybe first 10 games of the season. And LeBron kind of took things back over again. And Kevin Love's numbers has definitely dipped since, maybe the 15th game or so. And now Kyrie Irving is coming back. If I were you, and not say that Kevin Love's not going to have any value whatsoever, but he's a guy who I'd definitely be looking to see what I could get out there, see if I can, package him with somebody else and maybe get an upgrade at that position if possible. But remember, he's still very good, can rebound, shoot the threes and everything like that. But he's somebody I would be looking to maybe unload and just kind of see float some ideas out there. Dirk Nowitzki, who featured on the show as well, been playing great basketball. But he's up there in age, and I don't know if his efficiency is going to stay as high as it has been overall across the board. He's looking at a 50-40-90 season percentage-wise. We are also looking at Chandler Parsons eventually working his way back into the system as well as Wesley Matthews. So Dirk is another guy you may want to float out there just to kind of see what the value is too. And as I mentioned, Parsons, he might be a buy low guy right now. He's somebody who doesn't have his legs back, but is still on a minutes restriction. Definitely could be someone who pays some dividends for you because he's expected to ramp up his activity and probably start playing in January, as a full complement of minutes. And obviously he's a younger guy. As long as he can stay healthy, Dallas has a lot of confidence in him and what he's been able to do. Some of the windows that might have been closed, John Wall was playing real bad for a good stretch of games. Now he's turned it up, so that window is closed now on John Wall. You can probably forget about trying to acquire him. Chris Paul too, with he was banged up with a lot of different injuries. He came back recently and had an 18 assist game, so that window is probably closed as well. But another guy you might want to target, and this may sound crazy, is Markieff Morris. If he gets out of that Phoenix situation, he's a guy who can definitely produce. If he goes to if he goes to Houston or if he goes to New Orleans, I think those are two destinations where he could be potentially very, very successful. Can fit their style of play, especially if he plays defense and it gives it that tough-mindedness that both those teams seem to lack. Especially in New Orleans too, because they're kind of out of the playoff picture right now. He may have the ability to kind of really fill Ryan Anderson's role, who they potentially trade for him, and really kind of go nuts, if you will. Mo Williams, as we mentioned, Kyrie Irving, if you can get anything from him now, which I doubt you can, he probably should be gone. He's going to be waiver wire material at some point because Kyrie Irving is coming back. And another sell high guy is Rajon Rondo. He's playing out of his mind. So this is somebody right now, before the wheels fall off or something else happens in Sacramento. Again, I'm a risk taker. I'd probably stick with him. But if you're a little uneasy, Rondo's a guy I'd be looking to potentially sell. Finally, Kenneth Faried and Klay Thompson. Both those guys haven't had the great starts that they should have had, especially on their respective teams. Klay is coming out of it a little bit, but he's been overshadowed by what Stephen Curry's been doing all season long. So Klay's window might be closing, and again, he still has a name value, so it might be hard to pull him away, but he hasn't produced the way that he did last season.
I think the couple of the guys that you just mentioned, Rajon Rondo, Klay Thompson, are really intriguing people themselves, because I think when you look at what Rajon Rondo was potentially supposed to bring, I don't think he was going to give you the kind of fantasy numbers. I mean, right now he's giving you starting lineup type fantasy numbers. Like, he's a primary person that you want plugged in on a nightly basis, just given the fact that he has the firepower around him to put up the assist totals. And if he can get his point totals up, whether it be driving to the basket or even making a quarter of the shots that he throws up, I mean, he's just potentially lethal. And he's back to somewhat of his old defensive ways, where he's getting steals and he's filling up the stat sheets at normal. So to me, I think that, he's someone that you can get a good package for. The interesting person I really think about now is when we mentioned Klay Thompson, how you just talked about it before, because I really feel like there's going to come a lull period for Stephen Curry. Not because Stephen Curry is not capable, or he's going to start throwing up bricks. I just really think that Stephen Curry is the type of person that likes to pace himself. And I really think that there is a hunger element in Klay Thompson. I think he's going to be someone that, especially when Steve Kerr comes back, you can kind of tell that Steve Kerr likes to see Steph Curry to be more of the play creator, because he's already confident about his playmaking ability. Thus, he's going to emphasize more about getting more shots for Klay Thompson. So that could be a potential possibility, and maybe a good selling point, that if you're looking to move someone like Klay Thompson, that you can convince someone that Klay Thompson is eventually going to be someone that is going to have his numbers probably spike during the second half of the season. Let's keep in mind, he's still scoring somewhere close to 20 points per game, even with what the ridiculousness that Steph Curry is doing. But I just like and I'm intrigued about these two particular guys, because those guys can offensively help bolster those numbers in any course of the season, as long as they stay healthy. We've seen already Klay Thompson show signs of a little bit of brittleness because of his ankle situation, but I guarantee you, once Steve Kerr comes back into the fray, Klay Thompson, I think, is going to be a beast. And then that really means that the Golden State Warriors, whether they still are winning games or the streak is eventually over, it still means that the Warriors are going to be an absolute monster once he really gets right and starts shooting the basketball the way that he should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I was surprised to see that his numbers were a little bit down from a season ago, but he's had some electric games. And most recently, he had a 39-point outing against the Indiana Pacers, and hit, whatever it was, 8 threes, 10 threes. I can't remember what it was at the time. So yeah, that it's ironic, because like I say, you're not going to get him for dirt cheap, but he was struggling a little bit. So his owner might now kind of be like, all right, well, he's coming out of it. So the window might have closed per se. But he's definitely somebody I'd be trying to target, for his overall game, if you will. If you could get him, not necessarily on the low, but definitely cheaper than he would have cost you at the beginning of the season.
Definitely, man. Definitely. Well, what an awesome show that we've had this week, Shaw. As usual, we're hitting on all cylinders, getting at the points, driving it home, and we're doing it like, we're doing it almost quick, almost in that getting into our offensive set about as quickly as the Golden State Warriors are, man.
Yeah, man, we're coming up to the court, jacking up those threes, throwing alley-oops like we just don't care, destroying the defense, man. We're definitely in the zone, and I think it's great to have this type of show where we're able to, like you said, touch on all topics. Everything that has to do with the NBA or business-related things, fantasy basketball, and obviously even some of the, downtrodden topics, if you will, like the Philadelphia 76ers. But overall, a great show, great atmosphere to be in. I love the NBA at this time of year. Christmas is coming too, so that's going to be when all eyes really start to focus on the league. We're in a good groove, as you said earlier, man, and I just want to keep it going.
Definitely, man. And speaking of Christmas coming a little bit early for you, man. I mean, you're traveling abroad now during this part of the holidays, but I'm anticipating that you shall be around come Christmas Day time when it really pops off and all of those premier NBA games are now on full tilt. Either that, or if you're going to be stranded on some kind of island, I know that you're going to make sure that you got the tinfoil antenna beaming quite nicely towards the satellite, gleaming high in the upper sky.
Well, I'll definitely be back and around for Christmas, but luckily we live in an amazing digital age right now. So even though I'm going away for a little bit, I'm still able to stay in contact. I'm going to have my Twitter. I'm going to have my WhatsApp. I'm going to have my text messaging, and even have a little broadband where I can check in on some games here and there and check the box score, see what's going on. Although I probably won't get to see too much live action, I'm definitely going to keep my finger on the pulse, as you like to say, of what's going on in the NBA.
Oh, definitely, man. And correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think we might be calling one of those basketball games around Christmas time? I mean, there's that possibility, you know?
There's always a possibility now, with, again, it's a wonderful time to be alive, if you will, especially with our friends and partners over at Rebel.tv. So yeah, we might get into the Christmas spirit a little bit and, come into your homes, into your ears, if you will, broadcasting one of those Christmas Day games. Stay tuned, man. We just don't know. We don't want to release anything just yet, but it's a strong possibility.
Oh man, I love this, man. Yeah, I mean, you can do no wrong right now, Shaw, but I just need to throw on the white beard and the hat, you know what I'm saying? And give you the big old, Christmas, give you the Jolly Saint Nick gloves, man. Riding dirty for the holidays, man. I love it. I love it.
Let's do it, bro.
Special thanks to our man Jake Pavorsky, editor for Liberty Ballers. Be sure to check those guys out to keep up with what's going on with the Philadelphia 76ers, home of the SB Nation. Remember to go to www.libertyballers.com. He's available on Twitter, and remember to get at the website's Twitter handle at Liberty_Ballers. Again, we like to thank him for jumping on and helping talk to us about what's going on right there in the 76ers and the state of affairs out there. My man Warren Shaw, and of course yours truly, Cal Lee here. I mean, we appreciate everybody tuning in, and we cannot wait to continue to give you the goods, the butter goods, discussing all things regarding the NBA. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.